blood within the damaged blood vessel. So it's the first stage of wound healing, okay, hemostasis. So this involves coagulation, so the blood changing from a liquid form to a gel-like form, and then an intact blood vessel are central to moderating blood's tendency to form clots. So what are the stages of hemostasis? There are 4. So the initial stage is muscular spasm, then the platelet formation of the platelet plug, and then the blood coagulation or the clotting mechanism, and then the last is growth of fibrous tissue to close the hole in the blood vessel. So these are the stages. Okay, spasm, vascular spasm. So initially after a cut, di ba? Parang we will experience like a numb, knowing, numb sensation. That's from the spasm of the blood vessel. Then sunod, formation of a platelet plug, and then followed by blood coagulation. And then this one, formation of the fibrous tissue to seal off the cup. So this one I got this from your book, from our book, Guyton. This picture of the event that when a blood vessel is cut, okay, blood flows from that cut portion. So what will happen is the platelet will try to agglutinate, and then fibrin appears, and formation of a fibrin clot, and lastly the clot retracts. Okay. So the first step is vascular spasm. So what brought about the spasm or vascular spasm? So first, this one is nervous reflexes initiated by the pain, because when you have a cut in your skin, maski ano la, you went to the manicurista, and then the manicurista accidentally nipped and nip your nasubrahan, dumugo, di ba? It's painful. Maski kamay lang. So the nervous reflexes due to the pain will cause spasm, because your vascular system or your blood vessel has, di ba, may muscle yan, smooth muscle. So local myogenic spasm initiated by damage to the vessel wall. So the smooth muscle in the blood vessel wall will try to contract. Okay. Then the next step is the formation of a platelet plug. So how is it, made about? So when platelet come in contact with the collagen fibers in the vascular wall, they will swell and form irradiating processes and become sticky and adhere to collagen in the tissues and to a protein known as the von Willebrand factor. So they secrete ADP, adenosine diphosphate, and they form thromboxane A2. So this one will activate nearby platelets to form a loose plug. So the plug formed from this is a loose plug, U-alpha. So platelet plugging is extremely important for closing minute holes in the blood vessels. Okay, so that we should have a normal platelet, a normal functioning platelet, normal platelet count, diba? From where does the platelet, what is the progenitor cell of the platelet? Dinihagatikang, from a fragmented megakaryocyte, remember? Then the megakaryocyte is from the myeloblastic series, and hematopoietic stem cell, differentiating into a myeloblast. Okay. So the initial is platelet plugging. After the spasm, you will have formation of a platelet plug. So every now and then, we just don't know, inside the body, inside our blood vessels, we have blood vessels being it's not the blood vessels has So it's not may mga butas-butas, so like may increase in arterial pressure, mga minute hemorrhages. Why is it that we don't think, well, we don't just feel it? Because the platelet will go into action. Dali-dali din siya, pansak all those minute holes inside the body. So they help a lot. That's why you have to have this normal platelet count. Then the tight plug is formed by the fibrin threads and then attaching to the platelet. So you have a tight plug. So the initial is a loose plug. Yeah? Okay. So the platelets. So let's discuss the platelet because they are important in blood, the hemostasis. So what are the functional characteristics of platelets? They are non-nucleated. So just like the RBC, diba? They are fragments of your megakaryocyte. So they are fragmented. So they are non-nucleated. Then they have actin, myosin, these are protein, and thrombocytopenia molecules. Where did you come across actin and myosin? In a lecture. Lecture in the Paloma. Ano, Kenneth Baoy. Where did you come across this term? I think you have met actin and myosin. In the lecture on the muscle, diba, may actin, myosin. So they have, the platelet have actin and myosin. These are protein structures. Then they have residual ER, endoplasmic reticulum, and Golgi apparatus. And they synthesize enzymes and they can store calcium. Then the platelet have mitochondria, an enzyme system to synthesize ATP and ADP. Then they also have enzyme system that will synthesize prostaglandins. Then they have fibrin stabilizing factor. They have growth factor that provides growth and multiplication of vascular endothelial cells, vascular smooth muscle cells, and fibroblasts, which are responsible for the repair of the damaged blood vessel. Then they have glycoprotein coat on the surface, which adheres to the injured endothelial cells. Then phospholipids found in the membrane activates the intrinsic system of blood clotting. So we will discuss later the intrinsic and the extrinsic system. So in the blood, they have a half-life of 8 to 12 days. Diba? In the previous lecture, the half-life of platelet is 10 days. So 8 to 10 days. Main pag-exam mag-una. Ma'am, nasring dito usa nga slide, ma'am, 10 days la. So, ay mo choices dito 8 to 12. Ora ka makakitahin 10. So, di mo in-answer none of the above. Okay, so coagulation. So what happens when blood is shed? It loses its fluidity and it becomes semi-solid, gel-like. Okay. Then clot begins to develop in 15 to 20 seconds. So from a small clot, in 15 to 20 seconds, your clot begins to develop, and it takes more than this one. Something is wrong with your clotting system. Then after 20 minutes to an hour, the clot will retract. So these are the various clotting factors. So okay. I copied this from, I don't know, parang colorful. So these are the factors, and these are the names. And then aside from this, may dapat ibang mga names. Like this one, the anti-hemophilic factor B, is also known as the Christmas factor. Okay. So factor 1 is fibrinogen, factor 2 prothrombin, factor 3 is thromboplastin or tissue factor, factor 4 is calcium, 5 is labile factor. You notice there is no factor 6 because it's unlabeled. I don't know. Until now, waray pa. Factor 7, stable factor. 8 is the anti-hemophilic factor. And the 9 is the anti-hemophilic factor B or the Christmas factor. 9 is Stewart Power factor. 11 of 10. 11, plasma thromboplastin, antecedent PTA. The Hageman factor is factor 12, and factor 13 is fibrin stabilizing factor. I will understand if ma-complain ka, mainumduman ko ba ito? You don't need to remember everything. And ano na lang, where does this factor came into play during the hemostasis or during the clotting pathways? Okay. So what is ano here? Very popular ini nga, anti-hemophilic factor A. Factor 8. Madaling numduman, 8 and 9. This one, the anti-hemophilic factor B, Christmas. Fibrinogen, calcium, because calcium is almost always present in all of the, whether it's in the intrinsic or the extrinsic pathway, added calcium. Okay, so we'll go to the clotting mechanism. So there are 3 essential steps in blood coagulation. The first is the formation of the prothrombin activator. Then the second step is prothrombin activator. So you have already the prothrombin activator in the presence of a sufficient amount of calcium. It will cause conversion of prothrombin to thrombin. Okay? And then the third step, your thrombin will cause polymerization of fibrinogen molecules to fibrin. Okay, then this fibrin now will form a mesh or parang meshwork of fibrin molecules to seal up the blood to have this process, blood coagulation. So in these 3 essential steps, this is the most important step, no? The formation. This is the rate limiting factor in blood coagulation, because without the prothrombin activator formation, the other step will not, will not occur, or we'll have a hard time, having the, because like prothrombin activator, it requires this one to convert prothrombin to thrombin, and then the thrombin now will cause polymerization of fibrinogen to fibrin. Ano yun siya? Nagawas mo ini nga blue. Okay. Wala siya, ano ini? Hapon gin. The X ko la. Okay. Okay, so this is the clotting mechanism. So, it said, in the presence of a prothrombin with enough calcium, sufficient amount of calcium, it will activate your prothrombin to thrombin. Okay, then the thrombin will act on fibrinogen. In the presence, again, look, there is a calcium here to fibrin fibers, and then the fibrin fibers cross-link to become the clot. Okay, so this is parang the summary of the steps in blood clotting. So prothrombin, where does it come from? It's continuously formed in the liver. So so it's converted to thrombin, no, by the prothrombin activator. It requires vitamin K for normal activation of the prothrombin. So the liver requires vitamin K, needs vitamin K for normal activation of this prothrombin. Okay, because this prothrombin is from the liver. So where did this one came from? Diningati ka nga vitamin K. Okay, so vitamin K, we get this from the gut, from in the intestine. Our gut bacteria, intestinal bacteria, example nila, E. coli, they produce vitamin K. Okay, then and also we get exogenous source of vitamin K. So if those the nurses, you do this, you were assigned, and you were assigned at the OB delivery room when the child, with the baby or neonate is delivered, you give vitamin K shots, vitamin injection, vitamin K. Because this one will help in prevention of bleeding. Okay. Okay, so vitamin K is needed by the liver for normal activation of prothrombin. Okay, the prothrombin is a plasma protein with a molecular weight of 68,700. Okay, you just do away with the numbers. Okay, look at that yung mga 68,700, blah, blah. Okay, then what is thrombin? But prothrombin converted to thrombin. It's a protein enzyme with a weak proteolytic activity. This acts on fibrinogen to remove 4 low molecular weight peptides from the fibrinogen to form fibrin monomers. And then these fibrin monomers now forms a mess or baga, a block to seal the to, to seal the cut or involves in the clotting from the tight plug. So formation of the prothrombin activator. So we said this is the rate limiting factor in blood coagulation because if you do not have the activator, the other processes will not occur. So there are two ways where prothrombin activator are formed. It's by the extrinsic pathway and the intrinsic pathway. So in extrinsic pathway, you involve tissue factor. This tissue factor comes from the injured tissue or injured blood vessel. It releases this tissue factor. Then factor 10. So Fx is factor 10, then factor 7, factor 5. While the intrinsic pathway involves contact of factor 12 and the platelets with collagen. So this one looks easy. Extrinsic tissue factor, F factor 10, 7, 5. Madali mo memoryahon. 10, 7, 5. Tapos dito naman, factor 12 plus platelet. Para kang parang I made it as parang joke na lang sa student software. So, parang magtinaya ka na lang ng swertres, tulog ka number X75 1075. May swertres ba nga ganun? Okay, but though it looks simple and pathway later medyo magulo. Ito, that's it. So this is the extrinsic. Okay, so tissue trauma to the tissue releases a tissue factor, which will activate factor 7, activated factor, factor 7. Tapos this activated factor will activate factor 10, and the presence of calcium, you have factor 10, and then your factor 10 with the forms your prothrombin activator, and then again your prothrombin activator will convert the prothrombin to thrombin. So if you notice in all of this reaction, you have calcium here, calcium here, calcium here. So calcium is very important. Okay? By the way, don't worry. I do not give exam like this nga. Ipatrace ko ha imo ini nga tanan. Everything comes in a multiple choice question. So this is the extrinsic pathway. So the speed is faster than the intrinsic. And this one is the intrinsic, mas ano, mas magulo, mas damo mga factor. Okay? So that's how this prothrombin activator is formed. Okay? So it starts with blood trauma or contact with collagen, di ba we said earlier, ang intrinsic pathway. So activating factor 12, you have an activated factor 12, then you have this HMW kininogen, high molecular weight kininogen or prekallikrein. It activates 11, then in the presence of calcium again, activates factor 9, and then activating factor 8 down the cascade. Okay, so in the end, as I have, no? Your prothrombin activator, this one, and your function now is to convert your prothrombin to a thrombin. Okay, then a thrombin to a converts your fibrinogen to fibrin, and then the clot. The first cascade that I showed you. This one parang panggulo-gulo lang siya. But sometimes if you are wala ka na ibang magawa, try to memorize everything, yung activated something. But frankly, I tell you, ako, I do not stress myself with this. So it's just good to know that prothrombin activator formation can be by extrinsic and intrinsic pathways. Okay, sorry. The intrinsic pathway occurs faster, although when there is an injury to the tissue, just like our immune system, it both came into action, the natural and then the specific. Pareho gap din he. So when you have a cut, an injury to the tissue, both the extrinsic pathway and the intrinsic pathways goes into action. Although the speed is mas faster lang extrinsic. Because if you notice, shorter and cascade, di ba? Mas simpler. Okay. So, blood clot. So now, clot, what happens when you have a blood clot? It's now invaded by the fibroblast, and then the next step is the clot dissolve or dissolution of the clot. So it's a positive feedback on clot formation. So if you remember the first two chapters in physio, where we talk about homeostasis, that the body, most bodily processes operates on a negative feedback, but not this one. No, this is one example of a positive feedback mechanism acting on the body to maintain homeostasis. Just like when the patient is on pregnant woman on labor, it's a positive feedback mechanism. Okay, so clot initiates positive feedback to promote more clotting, because when you have an injury, bleeding, for negative feedback, what I clotting, it's opposite, di ba? So this one, it's a positive feedback because you need to have more clotting so that the bleeding will stop, so that the patient will not go into hemorrhagic shock or massive blood loss. So, okay. So the role of calcium ion in the extrinsic and intrinsic pathways. So if you take note that those cascades, the extrinsic and intrinsic, is in our book. So just flip those pages in the book on this. So if you will notice, except for the first two steps in the extrinsic and intrinsic pathways, calcium are required for promotion, or for acceleration of all the blood clotting reactions. So the absence of calcium, blood clotting by either pathway will not occur. So either by extrinsic or the intrinsic pathways. So you will need to have calcium, and you can supplement that in your diet, or you're taking uh, calcium supplements. Okay. So intravascular anticoagulant. So we have, why is it that the blood in circulation, when it's not clot, it does not clot, it goes in circulation. So this is one of the factor that the blood is not clotted inside the blood vessel is the smoothness of the endothelial cell surface. Okay, so the endothelial cell surface are so smooth that when blood flows through it, tuloy-tuloy, waray nasangot. Waray nasangot. So it prevents the contact activation of the intrinsic system. Pag may dana-cut, may samad na, so may dana, the surface is no longer smooth. So what happens when blood flows through it, may dana nagsangot-sangot. Parang you just correlate that, like you have a pipe in the house na nagbara-bara. So because of the smoothness of the blood vessel, so there is no, blood is not coagulated, so it flows smoothly. Then the glycocalyx on the endothelium, this is the lining epithelium of the blood vessel, it repels clotting factors and platelets. Okay. Then thrombomodulin, binding with thrombin to form a thrombomodulin thrombin complex. It slows the clotting process. Okay, so when thrombin combines with thrombomodulin, it slows down the clotting process. While in the clotting mechanism, we said the prothrombin is converted to thrombin by the prothrombin activator, and then the thrombin acting on the fibrinogen to form fibrin fibers. So their thrombin becomes a coagulant. But when thrombin binds with thrombomodulin, naging anticoagulant. Yeah. So it activates protein C, which acts as an anticoagulant by inactivating factors 5 and factor 8. Okay, so what are the important anticoagulants in the blood? So you have fibrin fibers formed during the process of clotting. Then the antithrombin 3 or the antiheparin cofactor, which is an alpha globulin, and heparin, which is present in the blood in a small concentration, and they are produced by the mast cells. Okay, lysis of blood clots. Okay, so when we have clots in the body or in the blood vessel, in the injured tissue, the activated profibrinolysin or plasminogen, it's a proteolytic enzyme that has the action like that of trypsin. Trypsin is an enzyme from the pancreas that helps in the digestion. So this plasmin or fibrinolysin helps in the lysis of the clotting coagulants like fibrinogen, factors 5, factors 8, factors 12, and prothrombin. Medyo magulo na, damo natin pag hinumduman yung mga factor. Okay. So these are conditions in the body that can cause excessive bleeding. One is deficiency in vitamin K. Okay. So if you have deficiency in vitamin K, what happened? Again, he said this is required for required in where? Din na to required vitamin K?
On synthesis.
Okay. So required by the liver. So if you have deficient in vitamin K, you will not have the prothrombin in the liver. Diba? So what happens in, say, you have a child who is malnourished, and then you know have a liver condition or liver disease or some GI problem, because this one is from the intestine. So if you are not producing enough of vitamin K, so the liver will be also deficient in producing the prothrombin. Okay. Then another condition is hemophilia. This is a familial disease. And then thrombocytopenia or deficiency in platelet. This will be discussed one by one. Okay. Oh, here. So vitamin K is an essential factor to liver carboxylase that adds a carboxyl group to your glutamic acid residues on 5 of the important clotting factors: prothrombin, factors 7, 9, 10, and protein C. And it's continuously synthesized in the intestinal tract by bacteria. So failure of the liver to secrete bile into the GIT will also impede the absorption of your fat-soluble vitamins. You're adding vitamin A, D, E, and K. So one of the fat-soluble vitamin is K. And the other condition is hemophilia. It's a bleeding disease almost exclusively in males following trauma. So major kumbaga, trauma to traumatic injury or so those with hemophilia, hindi na nga to. The son of the last Tsar of Russia, Nikolai, he has this disease. So 85% of cases is due to abnormality or deficiency of factor 8. And that's the classic hemophilia or hemophilia A. While 15% of cases of hemophilia are due to a factor 9 deficiency. Genetic transmission is by way of the female chromosome, the XX chromosome. And the hemophilia carrier XXD, it transmits the disease to half of the male offspring and the carrier state to half of the female offspring. Okay, and this is quite an expensive disease because you need to have injection of purified factor 8, and this is quite expensive. Then another condition that could cause excessive bleeding is thrombocytopenia. Thrombocytopenia means your platelet count is low. Okay. Bleeding from small venules and capillaries. This happens in thrombocytopenia, while that from a larger vessels is in hemophilia. Okay. So you will have small purple blotches on the skin of the thrombocytopenic patient. So the term for that is thrombocytopenic purpura. Is the small purpuric blotches on the skin. Okay. Then bleeding occurs when platelet will fall below 50,000 per microliter. What's the normal platelet count again? Can you still remember what we had the other day?
200 to 400.
Okay, so that's between 250 to 400. So when the platelet count falls below the 50, the patient is thrombocytopenic, and then bleeding occur. And this is also one of the parameter we determine in dengue. When to give the platelet. Then there are cases of thrombocytopenia wherein we don't know the cause, why the patient's platelet just go down. So we call the term is idiopathic thrombocytopenia. So prevention of blood coagulation outside the body. So inside the body, it can be prevented, diba? Your thrombomodulin complexing with thrombin. While outside the body, we have heparin and substances that decreases calcium ions in the blood. Because you say calcium ions are important for blood clotting, okay? Both in the extrinsic and the intrinsic pathways. So substances that decrease calcium ions, we have oxalates and citrates. Okay? And heparin. And diba in the medtech, when you extract the blood, but the blood, if it's a non-siliconized test tube, it will, I think, in a few minutes, it will clot. But if it's in a siliconized tube, it will at least last for an hour before the blood clots. Okay. Then usually we use this one, citrate, calcium citrate instead of the oxalates. I think the medtech new days. Okay, so these are the tests for blood coagulation. So bleeding time is 1 to 6 minutes. Clotting time is 6 to 10. And pro time or prothrombin time is 12 seconds. Usually now, I think we test only for the pro time or prothrombin time. And if we had the face-to-face mode, we do exercises on this, the bleeding, the clotting, and the pro time. So just these are the normal values. Okay, so just keep this and next na. So mnemonics for the coagulation factor. So there are several, but I just put this on. Maybe you would like to try and remember the clotting factor through this mnemonics. Pero ako, I didn't like, di ko magets. Freshers, party tonight, come, let's sing and call seniors, please have fun. Diba? Also ito, in anatomy, remembering the bones of the and the smaller bones in the wrist, never lower thesis panty, mama might come home. Para how to remember all this. So freshers party. So fresher stands for fibrinogen, party is for prothrombin. Tonight, factor 3, thromboplastin. Then factor 4 is calcium, come. Then this is factor 5, the labile factor. Then factor 7, stable factor. This one is the anti-hemophilic factor 8. The Christmas factor. Okay, it has other name. The Christmas factor or the anti-hemophilic factor B or the plasma thromboplastin or the component PTC. Then senior is the Stewart-Prower factor. P is plasma thromboplastin. And then H is Hageman factor. That's factor 12 and 13. The fibrin stabilizing factor. I cannot, I don't use this mnemonics. So by and by na lang, you will get to Pero kamo lang, you can devise or you can adapt this for remembering all the names. Sorry. Another mnemonics is foolish people try climbing long slopes. After Christmas, some people have fallen. And this one, fit pants, tight collars, loose American shirts are cool, says pretty heroine Farah. So all of these three is about the clotting factors. Pili. But don't worry, I won't ask this in the multiple choice. wala na ito. Okay. So, parang summary na siguro last na to. Last slide. Major component of the hemostasis, or in ano ba ini? May nining araw siya na wala vascular, what happens, di ba? Essential steps. So you have vasoconstriction, platelet activation. This is primary hemostasis. And then you have secondary hemostasis. You have the coagulation cascade, the intrinsic, the extrinsic pathways. And then you have the formation of the blood clot. So in the primary hemostasis, the primary what is formed is a platelet plug. It's a loose plug. Then you have a firm plug or the clot. So you have the thrombin being converting fibrinogen to fibrin, and then you have a fibrin mesh making up the clot, and then it can be dissolved by plasmin. Lysis of the clot and degradation. So this is secondary hemostasis, primary. So it starts with an injury to blood vessel. Okay? So it loses its smoothness. So what happens when there is injury? So this area now that is injured becomes rough, and then the glycocalyx in this one is lost. So all the elements passing through that one, some of them will stick to this, and then you start the clotting mechanism. Okay. So that's it. Okay. I think this will be. Do you still have in your syllabus lectures on Monday? Wala na? Joanne?
Break na ata po.
Break na kita? Okay. Okay, so on January 4 siguro, I think Doc Paloma now will be lecturing on the respiratory module. So 4, 5, then on the 6th, we will have the quiz. I will make 40 questions out of what we have. Kasi kamuoy 5 chapters kan ma'am bangin tagkuan tagwalo kada chapter. It's not, no? Para na lang para kamo makafocus. I give a lot of questions on immunology and so yun, and then learn the normal values in the first lecture, the normal RBC, the normal platelet, the normal count, differential, etc. Learn the normal so that when you go into second year next year in pathology, you will learn the abnormals, the pathologic. So now learn the normal. Okay. So when you study, oy kay 5 chapter, 40 question, bayin tag 8 questions kada chapter. It's not. Siguro ito nga blood typing, just ask a few questions. Okay. Some student at Southwestern, ma'am, give us blueprint. Ako ng blueprint. Kumbaga kuan nga yan, pointers, kumbaga high school pa kita. Nasi ko, just study, read everything. Everything is interconnected and it's important and you will need them. Nagamit na? Okay. So, yun. Study on immunology, and then the one I forgot because I natanggal ko from my PowerPoint in immuno, yung portion on the immune globulin molecules, the 5 type of molecules, tapos an era kuan mga normal values, an era kuan where they're in which condition they will be increased or you will see them. Okay. Mas ad nakatabulate ito di that gayton. Yun lang. That's the one I missed yesterday. And then, nakakatungin itihan akon folder and micro. But today I did not bring the laptop, so I just rely on what is here. Okay. So, thank you for your time, for listening. I hope you will have more time to read on this because break naman kita. Bakasyon na. And then, we have nowhere else to go for the vacation. Kaya, man lagi ha, lockdown man lagi kita. So, stay at home, everybody. And then, do some reading during the Christmas break. Para, pag open ng klase, wow. So, I expect everybody to have good scores. Okay, 1 to 50. So, pwede kumuha na kamang 40. That's already a good score. Okay? So again, thank you and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas,
Merry
Doc.
Christmas po, Doc.
Thank you po, Doc. Merry
Yes po,
Christmas.
Doc.
Thank you
Thank
po,
you.
Doc.
Salamat po.
Thank you, Doc.
Welcome, welcome. Mm-mm. Okay, thank you siya. Pag ano kita siya, makakaraw siya. May kwarta na, di na? Oo,